Hello, everyone. Welcome to DADennial. I'm Mike Trank. Today, my guest is Lance Hillsinger. He is spent 34 years on the front lines of social work. He was stepping in where systems failed and where real change was needed. In retirement, he has not slowed down. He's put pen to paper, wrote not one, but up to 4 books. His memoir, In Place of the Parent, Inside Child Protective Services, gives an unflinching look at the heart and heartbreak of the system. Another book that is related to DADennial is Build a Better Bridge. He's also written books on Beyond Amelia, Lesser Known Women of Yesteryear, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, A Court Investigator Examines the Gospel. So first I want to thank you, Lance, for coming on. I appreciate it. Welcome to the DADennial podcast. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you for having me.
So 34 years in social work. I've been doing it now for close to 15. You've got to have some stories and some definitely the thoughts and ideas of your journey, right? So what drew you into the world, I guess, first in the world of child welfare, social work, and what kept you going for 34 years? I guess that's where
how I got started is kind of an interesting story in itself, I think so. After I got my master's degree from Vanderbilt, I returned to my native California, and I was working with a group of dual diagnosis clients, developmentally disabled and with some mental health issues too. And we would teach them community skills, and we worked in the partners. There was just 6 or 7 guys that I worked with. And the partner that I had, I was a senior partner, and the junior partner was paid just barely above minimum wage. And frequently was there a lot of turnover in the job. And one time I got partnered up with somebody, one of those people who, you say blue and they say green, you just don't click with. And one day she said to me, why don't we try to get Dale, who was one of the guys in the group, a job as a dishwasher at a county cafeteria. And I was just about to tell her, and I realized that was a good idea. There was this person who I had a bunch of conflict with, and then I realized she did propose something that was good. So we took a little field trip down to, this is in the pre-internet days, down to the Hall of Administration in downtown LA County. We found this big book that listed all the jobs that LA County hired, from accountant to zoologist. And fortunately, child welfare worker came before dishwasher, and that's how I thought, hey, that sounds like a job I'd like. And I applied and got it.
That's great. And then you went on to get a master's in psychology. I think I was reading too, right? You went on.
I had the master's first. I was returning to California.
Okay. And then what kept you going for all those years? Because as I know, the burnout ratio is quite high in the field, and especially it sounds like for people that don't know, right, when you're doing kind of the child welfare services or emergency services, that is a much higher kind of burnout ratio, I feel like, and challenging for people. Somewhere along the line, I heard that it's the 3rd most stressful job behind emergency room doctor and air traffic controller. Mm-hmm. And the odd thing they did in LA County was, normally you have you'd have a supervisor in a unit, and then you'd list the people in the unit alphabetically. Well, they listed people by their seniority. After 1 year, I was already in the middle range of seniority in the group. That's how fast the overtime was. Right. And one of the turnover was, I should say. And I like to point out that is one of the hot jobs. Civil service jobs usually don't have high turnover, but there's quite a bit of turnover there. And you lose institutional memory, and you lose experience, and you lose just how things are done. I mean, whatever field you're in, experience does help. Yep.
How I kept going, I just felt a connection. I had been a child welfare worker for 2, 3, 4 months, and I thought, this is it. This is my skill set versus what the job entails. There's a good match there. It became even a better match when I became a court worker. You're right, responding to those calls, emergency calls, a knock on the door because you're investigating a case. That was not particularly cases that I like to do. I handled, for most of my career, cases that had gone to court. And so I handled court cases for one cause, or for one reason or another. And some days were hard. Some days were hard. One day I was really frustrated. I thought, well, maybe I'll just work some other county, or some other state. And so I looked up, I lived in Tennessee, so I looked up Kentucky, and I looked in their civil service job section. And the entire state of Kentucky, they were only hiring one job. One plumber job was open. And I thought, you know what? I ought to be kind of grateful for what I have.
No, I think you're making good points of, there's, overworked, understaffed is, I feel like, a constant problem in the public sector for mental health work and social services. Do you have any emotionally impactful moments or things that you can think about in your social work career that kept you going?
It was a difference between, I worked for LA County for 5 years and then went to San Luis Obispo County, which is just north of Santa Barbara. And the difference was tremendous. In San Luis Obispo, LA County, I had 77 kids in my caseload at that point. And with that many people, somebody was doing good, somebody wasn't doing so good. You had a day where, not everybody was doing bad on the same day. San Luis Obispo, my caseload was the third, in part because I was a court worker again. But also sometimes you just have those days where that are just hard. That there's crises on all the cases, as opposed to if you have 75, your N is large enough, your sample size is large enough, you're not going to have everybody. You're going to have somebody doing good, somebody not doing good at any given time. Right. Part of it is the good days. As I kind of had like what I called dump milk days, and those And if I'll give you a little background to that, my wife's uncles were dairy farmers in Colorado. We visited them one time, and my wife's uncle was relating a story where it was wintertime, and the milk truck that picks up the milk from their container couldn't make it, and because of the snow. And they just had to milk the cows. They have to be milked every day, but the tank was full, and they just had to open the valve and just dump the milk into the so there's days that you just have to dump your milk, and I just kind of left that as kind of kept me through those days, those trialing days. Yeah. And if clients did say something that was nice and helpful, that was so good. And eventually I did have a lot of clients who did that. Thank you, appreciate that, or whatever. Those things help. You can't take a thank you to the bank to pay your bills, but someone who appreciates you. And I've even had cases where people felt like even though they didn't get their kid back, they felt like the system was fair to them and the problem was on their end. They couldn't recover from their drugs. There was no personal animosity to me. Well, there were sometimes there wasn't any personal animosity. They kind of said, okay, I wasn't ready to be a parent at this time in my life. Maybe not in those words, but that's the sentiment. Right.
No, yeah, it's a lot of growth, a lot of challenging, but you're kind of going in that situation that is in upheaval, in one extreme or the other.
And one of the things I point out in my last book is why I'm not a big go to church every day kind of Christian kind of guy. I've always been kind of spiritual. And sometimes I would park a block or two from a home, meditate, pray, just settle myself down, especially if I knew the person might be difficult, and just got at peace with it. And taking those moment or two was well worth it. And I was taught to always look for the good in people, and that was sort of what I grew up with. And so all the strength-based stuff, that was sort of came naturally because that helped me. We have the medical model that you're sick in this way, you're sick in that way. But you also look, social work kind of more emphasis on the strengths. What do you have? And so since from a spiritual level, I was always had that to look for the good in people, not to be Pollyannish about it. But that did help.
And that book is the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the court worker examines the gospel. Is that
That's correct, yes.
Book you're talking about?
Yeah.
And you had mentioned too with that book, it makes a donation to what was the name?
Razal. Actually, it's with any of my books.
Okay.
I'll make a donation to Razan, which is a humanitarian program in Ukraine.
And we'll
And
be
it's
putting
been
that
vetted by
on
the
the site as
Chamber of
well.
Commerce and other charity navigators, so it's a legitimate. Before I put my stamp of approval on it, I checked it out, and it's a legitimate charity.
So what was it like being the court worker and being involved, of that, what you're talking about of the religious, the gospel side of it, and how it kind of equated in your mind of what you would see every day in that field and what you were doing at the time?
Obviously, you can't preach to clients or
Right.
proselytize or anything like that. It just kind of helped me. As I said in my book, it's just the faith is in the background, like the air conditioning in the office.
Almost feels like trying to utilize the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in this case, as a coping skill, right? Of like, this is how I manage my day to day. This is how I kind of reflect and get through some of those.
It was a literal with
days.
me, but yeah, it was just kind of went back to how I was raised and that faith was important and things like that.
How did writing your memoir help you kind of process some of those years in the system? Do you find that cathartic or challenging or helpful when you were doing that?
That's what I thought. When I started with LA County, it was a very chaotic period with child welfare, and the system wasn't working very well. And that was sort of going to be my way of trying to make the system better. And yes, it was cathartic. It kind of helped me stay grounded in reality and what's a big issue, what's a small issue. And then as the years progressed, the system changed. And that made the book. So it was about a book over 20 years in the making. And so I was only able to have the time to finish it up in retirement. And just to make clear to your listeners that no government money was used. I didn't write the book on a government computer or on government time. I want to say that up front. And I did make efforts to, of course, to change names and things like that and change some other identifying information. So there's a long paragraph at the beginning of the book about maybe you think you see a neighbor in this book. Well, it could be somebody else's neighbor. The cases are sometimes very similar. And so.
Yeah. And Build a Better Bridge, I was reading that they talk about reforming like welfare policy. Is there a law or policy in this writing or that you think about now that you wish it did change or wish you could change in some way? I'm sure there's more than one, but
yeah, there's a lot of policies changes. I have two that I mentioned, but the reason I wrote that book is about in California, if a parent is poor enough, they get a court-appointed lawyer. In some states, in a child welfare case, they don't get appointed; they have to represent themselves. And that's just a bugaboo. That's one of the things I'm trying to rally against. California, roughly 90% of the people, at least 90%, are poor enough to qualify for court-appointed lawyer. So there's a relationship between the social ill of child maltreatment and poverty. And there's other,
obviously
homelessness is related to poverty and things like that. So I wanted to say something about the system. And yet I know that people just don't want to throw money away and enable people and that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's why I wrote the book. To answer some specifics there, when a woman is on welfare, let's just imagine she has two children by two different men. Okay, neither man is the home. Say one guy has a decent job, he pays his child support, and she's not going to get any welfare for him because his child support, the welfare that she would get would exceed, the child support that she gets would exceed the welfare check. But the other guy, he's not so successful, he's not paying any child support, and she's on welfare as a family of two herself and her one child, even though she has two children. It's government talk, which are family of two for as far as welfare benefits go.
Gotcha.
If that guy does work, or when he does work, the child support is collected from him, and it doesn't go to the mom. it goes back to the government. And that sounds kind of logical. Okay, government money, you're kind of recouping some from the dad.
Right.
That's from a bookkeeper's point of view, or maybe an accountant's point of view. But reality is that doesn't motivate the man to be in the mainstream economy. It motivates him to work under the table, maybe even work illegally under the table, not just cash jobs. Right. And also, he doesn't get any credit. So the mom doesn't see that anything from him. And, if she's on welfare, money's tight to begin with. And it just makes his relationship with this child. So even though it means a little less money to the government, whatever he works, let's say he works irregularly, which very often these dads do, or works at a minimum wage job, let the child support that he pays go directly to the mother. That will offset her poverty, and that will build a better relationship.
I agree. I think, especially in the government part of it, to try to keep up with modern day is challenging, to say the least, I guess is the one way of putting it. That some of those policies are stuck in a different era and a different time, and not understanding of right, even if you're trying to, I guess what you're saying, or what I'm understanding is, even if you're trying to do the right thing, that you still can get dinged or punished, I guess.
80% of the time it's the guy and he gets behind in his child support, and he's just can't get out from that. And then he goes to a new job, and he's got to tell the employer, okay, I got a wage card in a minute. It's hard. And in California, they charge 10% interest on the stuff that, back child support. And I had one fellow in my caseload, he probably fathered children he couldn't afford to support, but he had a decent job now. He had a good union job, but he was barely making beyond interest payments with this. He was never ever going to get out from under it. So I don't want to get too serious with but if I could make one point about why we have poverty, is that people who are better educated generally have better incomes. The dropout rate for boys is significantly higher than girls. I think the two things as far as government policy should be is that school districts should be required to post their graduation or their dropout rates by gender. Because one of the things you have to identify a problem before you can solve it. And so the first step is just to identify that here's a gender gap here that has very serious ramifications. A girl who fails to graduate high school is more likely to get pregnant and go on government assistance. Okay, that's right. The man who doesn't graduate high school, yes, he may father a child that he can't afford to support, and he's more likely to drift into a criminal lifestyle. So his failure to graduate is a matter of public safety, while the girl's inability to graduate high school is just a financial burden. I'm talking, of course, there's exceptions and everything, but it's much heavily weighted to the guy's side.
Yep. No, definitely. I've seen and heard these statistics before, and I appreciate you bringing them up. And I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen as well, of all these kind of things that kind of prevent you from getting back on your feet and paying back and having interest or loans. So seeing that one too, unfortunately, it can be a little heartbreaking at times, because you see and kind of know that feeling of they could just see and understand where I'm coming from, that this person really is trying and wanting to correct their wrongs, and it's hard. Yeah, it is.
I have two comments about that. Is that one, in order to get boys to graduate from high school, I think they need to change the curriculum a little bit. Typically, you need 4 years of English to graduate from high school. English classes are predominantly fiction. And one of the things I learned as an author is that the fiction market is much more lucrative than the nonfiction market. And 80% of fiction books are sold to women. Boys generally do not appreciate fiction as much. And learning to read fiction or reading fiction doesn't really prepare you for anything. It doesn't tell you how to write a business report, or how to write a sales report, or a traffic report if you're a police officer, or an accident report, or whatever. And that we need to take out at least a year of fiction and put in a year of nonfiction writing. whether that's sports writing, something that's going to keep boys in school more and prepare them better than, well, what does this character thing, what's the character development? That's not going to get you a job.
Yeah. No,
So that's
completely agree. I think we've seen that too in schools, right? Of taking out classes that teach you some basic handyman kind of tools, kind of ideas and things that, you might fall in love with. You might be like, oh, I want to go into welding or mechanic or, lose some of these programs in public schools that, right, I've seen the statistics as well of colleges more and more as majority women.
It's about
Less
11
men
to
going
7.
college. Yeah.
It's about 11 to 7. And in the professional schools, at the elite schools, it's about 50-50. But if you go to the second tier schools, it gets to be almost 2/3 or 1/3. And except for dentistry, for whatever reason, dentistry is about 50-50. But in my research for the book, for Build a Better Bridge, I ran across that yes, especially in the mental health field. If a man, men have an obstacle. We tend not to want to go to therapy. And I think if we did want to go, we'd want to more often be more comfortable talking with a man, as many women are more comfortable talking with a female therapist. And yet the number of men who become psychologists, or the percentage is dropping, and it's now predominantly, like I said, professional schools. Those studying psychology is mostly women.
When health insurance kind of came in more with the HMOs and diminished that earning opportunity, so even like that thought of more men going into psychology wasn't as lucrative, and it wasn't as kind of pushed as much as like, well, you go into engineering, go into accounting, go into finance, go into marketing, all those business type degrees. We talk about mental health all the time. We kind of read about it and see it in the news all the time but right, when you have such a depth of difference of females to males, and trying to get more males into it, that is a lot of people I see is younger males to older males. So it is I think one of the biggest challenges in our field, and having 2 young boys of my own, it's definitely something that's on my mind on a daily basis of what will be their opportunities as they're in school now and learning and trying new things. So be honest, trying to tell them to go into this field is difficult. Go ahead.
One of the first podcasts I appeared on was Child Welfare Leaders, and the host was a young black woman, and we kind of talked about this topic a little bit. And I said, when a guy comes into a courtroom, more than likely his attorney will be a woman, the social worker is a woman, the attorney representing the county is a woman, the judge is likely a woman. The only other man in the courtroom is a bailiff, and he just feels, outgunned. And I think because she was a black person who's maybe often the only African American in a meeting, I'm presuming, or that kind of thing, very often, that she really got that. And it really helped out. Even if everybody's fine and appropriate and everything, you would just have the sense that the world's kind of stacked against you. So that's just an observation there.
No, I definitely have heard the feedback from patients that I've had throughout the years of, I'm glad to finally found someone I connect with. I guess is maybe that sentence kind of put together that I hear, because it is that thing of like, I want to try therapy, I want to get better, but everyone I try is like, they just don't get it, they just don't understand, and trying to find a male, trying to find someone that maybe is more relatable or has kids or maybe feeling similar ways that I do, right? I think there is a difference. I think, sometimes we lose that connection when we don't have someone that we can kind of build a rapport with, especially in psychology, for sure. I'm curious, kind of talking about dads and why we're here today. What have you seen, in terms of how have you seen fatherhood evolve over the past few decades?
Well, I do think that the fathers on my caseload over the course of the years became more actively interested, and then more and more of them wanted to participate. Many of them didn't, but in their child's life. Just one of the quirky things is that I was in the system long enough to where for paternity testing, which comes up fairly often, that you used to have to draw blood, and some guys were really shy of that. Now it's a swab in your mouth, and the cooperation, just that little thing, was the change. Going to a swab, more men were willing to agree to paternity testing. Even
that's interesting.
So, and one of the things that made it challenging is that, like a foster mother, states and counties vary quite a bit on the role between foster parents and the birth parents. San Luis Obispo County, we really encourage the foster parent and birth parents to have direct contact. Of course, let's say courts have ordered the visits to be supervised. The foster mother might meet the birth mother at a park and just be there to supervise the visit and enjoy that time. She might be willing to do that for the birth mother, but the birth father, maybe not. Right. So it makes it much more difficult for the father to do that. And you can understand her viewpoint. You can understand her reluctance. So that just makes it all the more challenging.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to get back to is like I said, there's poverty, and there's lack of the number of jobs, like in manufacturing, and and it doesn't matter who's been in power. There's about 2/3 of the few manufacturing jobs that there were like in the 90s. And we've had Republicans and Democrats since then, but there's just fewer jobs out there that pay decently. And the two jobs with at least decent pay, and the stability are teaching and nursing, female-dominated jobs. Those are jobs that are recession-proof.
Right.
Police, law enforcement, firefighting, those are the same thing. They're recession-proof jobs with great, you're going to be secure unless if you make a real serious mistake, you're going to continue being a police officer or a police firefighter if you want to. But the ratio, if you add up all the nursing and teaching jobs and all the police officer, firefighter jobs, it's about an 8 to 10 to 1 ratio. So in other words, there are more women with more stable jobs that have job security. Especially in the civil service jobs. I mean, we're talking about the routine jobs, court stenographer, that kind of thing, that are almost predominantly women, and they have job security. And then if you're working a guy in a factory, well, your factory closes,
Right. Yeah, no, it's been that way for a while now, right? It's been more and more, and I wish I had the number in front of me, but I know it is a substantial number of men that are of working age that just aren't working for one reason or another, and I think that's a big challenge for the future. I think just coming to mind too, of as we hear more and more of the AI talk, taking over jobs, not just low-level jobs, but mid-level jobs too, white-collar jobs. So even getting a college degree, even having some experience, doesn't feel safe anymore, right? Where it is just certain jobs like nursing, cops and firefighters right now. I forgot which insurance company it was, but someone was reporting to me of that you kind of go through the system and it's an AI robot, right? It kind of diagnoses you and kind of gives you the feedback of like, all right, you are this, and then we'll send you on to this prescriber, and then we'll talk about, that's one of the new things now that insurance is looking into, not just what you find online now since COVID, like Headspace and BetterHelp. So yeah, it's coming even in this field, and it's kind of talking about manufacturing. I think that's been ongoing for a long time, but I think it's now ramped up, where it's even people that have skills and have not just customer service, not just security, but just different level jobs.
And I point out, like in San Luis Obispo, we're heavily dependent on tourism, and we have a municipal parking lot, and we used to have parking lot attendants, and a few years back, they went to an automated system. Now, you could have been the best, most helpful parking lot attendant, told people how to cut the freeway and, where the local restaurants were, whatever, to tourists. And you could have been the best parking lot attendant, but now it's a machine. And what do that person do now? They had health benefits. They may not have made a lot of money, but at least it was steady. So
and I look at the other side of that too, of that person losing the job, but it's also that social communication piece, which I think we talked a lot about during COVID, but just that day-to-day interaction where if you're just going about your day as an average adult, that's your going to work, coming home, so you talk to your spouse, talk to a couple people at work, but just those little conversations, whether at a grocery store, whether at a parking attendant, of knowing the psychology of how impactful those are in a day, right? Just having that greeting of someone saying hi to you and asking how your day is, even if it's just a parking attendant, that we're missing out on those small little social experiences where human beings are social creatures. So losing out, and even something small like that, just makes me think of, right, that's someone that probably could have been a very nice person and loved just saying hi to, or, have a connection to just on a human level. And that's little things that we're missing out on too.
And one of the thing you were saying about social interaction, I'm fortunate to live within walking distance of a supermarket, and there's a self-checkout there. And so I miss one of the checkers used to, he will always tell me a joke or something, or make little comments, and I missed that. I missed having that little conversation. And I just remember one guy in my caseload, he was sharing with me that he was telling the counter person at Taco Bell that he was going on vacation. And that's how limited his life was. He didn't really have a lot of friends. His family had sort of kept distance. He didn't have guy friends, and he had lady problems, so he didn't have any, and how very socially isolating it was. And that wasn't healthy. And I politely try to tell him, but you probably don't want to share your vacation plans with the counter person at Taco Bell, but, that's just, and he saw that.
He probably doesn't have many people to talk to. Probably doesn't have, I think that's where a lot of men specifically, doing what I do, of kind of get stuck as we lose those kind of little pieces of interaction in our day-to-day.
As you will know, the suicide rate for men is much higher than women, especially for older men. And I'm not supposed to use a Masonic affiliation. I am a Mason, Freemasons back in that day. And I think that connection to the fraternal organization helps people, helps guys longer, and people who are lonely, they're more susceptible to that kind of depression and things like that. And if you have been, if you were the absent dad and now you're the absent grandfather, you're going to feel it a lot more.
More isolated, more alone. Yeah, for sure. You lose your sense of community, and if you're retired, and you're talking about older and younger. Those are, I think, the two biggest that I see with the higher rates of suicide and higher kind of isolation rates right now are big problems of how do we help, how do we manage, how do you undo that cycle, whether it's you're young and single, or if you are a father or a young father and struggling to continue to find work and being caught up in the system. It just kind of feeds on itself almost, it feels like.
I chuckled there because part of my weekly routine is I swim at a gym, and after that I reward myself by having an Egg McMuffin at McDonald's. And I've seen on several occasions people walk up and go to the kiosk to order online instead of going up to the counter person to order and talk with a human. And I find that so funny. And if there's lots of people in line, I can understand going to the kiosk or whatever. But just, why not just...
It's funny if you say that, especially with McDonald's. I've heard too of specifically where you live in California, that's a community that has a great older community, that they live one of the longest living people, live the longest in America.
Our percentage of retirees is higher than the national average. That's true. And we were one of the first counties to pass no smoking in restaurants. I think we were the first. And so there's a big health. People are fairly health conscious here, and the weather's temperate. So all those things go together. In fact, the pension board for county employees has to kind of take that into account, because we live longer, and so we can't go by national norms. They have to kind of add in a little factor there that when they're calculating pensions.
I'm curious, talking about dads and families here, Do you have a piece of advice? I feel like you're giving a few, but I'm curious if you have like one piece of advice you give to new dads who might be struggling or feel like, they're not getting it right.
It's not anything that's particularly unique or whatever, but stay involved. Be an involved dad, even if you're out of the home. So often I saw dads that were not involved in their children's lives, and that hurt, and their kids didn't do well. Like I had a kid in my caseload who was placed in a foster home with an older foster mother, single parent, and the kid was just he was really just hanging in there. But he got letters from his dad. His dad was incarcerated in prison in another state. Just those letters keeping him together. Then I'm sorry, he was incarcerated in jail. Then he went to prison. The letters stopped, and it just hurt the kid. And so stay involved as a dad, and that's what's important. And try to be there not just for the birthdays, but to be there consistently. And that's what it's hard. Because we want to avoid conflicts. Many men will say, I don't want to get in trouble, so I don't want to have conflict with the ex, have things like that, and they're leery of that. And I think that I have seen things succeed where people say, where the mom has recognized, it is easier. If I can let the dad have the kids every other weekend, then I have a life too. And I've seen that happen where they're kind of like, okay, I do need him to help me with the kids, even though he's out of the home. And you need to be consistent there, consistently in life. Will you make mistakes? Of course you will. Of course, I make plenty. But
every day,
you're more forgiving if you've done a lot of good things.
I agree. I think that was always one of my main goals, is to be there for my kids as much as I could be, and have that opportunity to see them grow up is a blessing for sure. I've been asked this question before, and having someone else that's worked in social work as long as you have, of how do we get the next generation of males involved in social work and in therapy? How do we teach them about empathy or burnout, resilience, like what the job's kind of like, without kind of scaring them?
I think one of the things is visibility. As I was doing research for Build a Better Bridge, I looked at various websites of law schools and things like that. And you saw often women, and you saw like a law school and the vet school and things like that. I didn't see a single African American man affiliated with any vet school at all in any picture anywhere. So I think you have to have visibility, and so when you trying to show the campus either electronically or literally, you have to have the men present. And I think just showing that and highlighting that sort of this is so-and-so. He's worked with this kind of population for 15 years and finds it very rewarding, and profiling those things. I
think you're right. I think makes me think of how I've answered it is similar to that of that visibility part of I don't think it's heard as much as you do hear more of teachers, of how do we get more male teachers involved, how do we get more male nurses involved into these fields that are more female dominated. But I don't think you hear enough of how do we get more males into psychology, social work, which I think is much needed, and I think is a job that will continue to be needed. Mental health isn't just going away. There isn't a blue or red pill yet that we can just take and all problems go away. So, it is still much needed, and I think it's just kind of contradictory, I find sometimes, of we talk so much about mental health, especially when unfortunately there's shootings or things like that happen, and we revert back to the mental health aspect of it, which I feel like is a big piece, but where's the kind of drive, where's the money, where's the motivation of how do we get more people involved on both sides, male and female, to be involved with mental health if it's as important as we hear?
There was much concern. You mentioned the pandemic and everything, and I know we're coming to a close. But there was a concern as when the COVID was starting that the suicide rate would jump up. It didn't really, but it was still twice what it was during the flu endemic in 1918. And
Yeah.
I think some ways that people are not as emotionally strong as they used to be, with the adversities or whatever, but they don't have that reserve. And how do we make people, in a broad sense, stronger? I think if you were, in the covered wagon, life was hard, and you had to suck it up to deal with life. And so when a tragedy struck, you weren't going to think of maybe because people went to church more often back then, and then suicides are prohibited, wrong. That's wrong in God and everything. And that's one thing that can help people be stronger. There's lots of things, there's sports and everything, and I think we need to somehow encourage that. And I make a comment in my book. Maybe we should have sponsored programs for senior men to reduce their suicide rate, and activities are gained for that, so that their mental health is up, so we're emotionally stronger as a society.
Yeah, I think there's a strong link of that isolation piece, especially over COVID. There was the evolutionary of being able to stop and think and kind of being able to process things, I think, is taken a turn in terms of those enlightenment kind of stages, and now it's kind of gone backwards from enlightenment to social media of 150 characters or less. So we're not really getting more enlightened. We're just kind of going backwards of, well, we have the time and the space. We're not in a fight or flight mode in our minds. We have food. We have the basic necessities, the hierarchy of needs, but we aren't evolving in our patterns of thinking.
Back some years ago, there was a tragedy at Disney World. A child had been eaten by an alligator. Very tragic. Michael Eisner went to call the family to offer his condolences, and his attorney said not to and everything, but he still felt morally responsible to do it. The very next day, or in fact, I think it was even less than the next day, Hong Kong Disney was opening up. Billions of dollars at risk, tens of thousands of jobs. He had to he has this horrible thing happen. A child, a guest at his place, and yet he had to get his act together for this opening ceremony at Hong Kong Disney. And I think that somehow we need to treat that we need to have that stoicism there. I don't know how you inoculate people, but I think we need to talk a little bit more about that so people have the strength to handle those adversities. Not that everyone's going to have to deal with tragedy involving a child and an alligator, but I think that we need to just be as strong or mentally strong as a society. And then I think that we need to encourage this in a way the mental health needs to approach that way of prevent as a kind of a prevention thing.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. So we end our sessions and use our DADennial podcast with a random question of, what's your favorite comfort food? Like, what do you do if you're by yourself or just craving a snack? What's your go-to late night food?
Well, I try to avoid late night foods. I've been doing a holding action as far as the weight goes. And I was asked during a job interview, how do you deal with stress? I said, I make sure I have a full dinner or full lunch before dealing with a difficult client. But as I was telling you about going to McDonald's after swimming, that's my egg McMuffins, 2 egg McMuffins. And so that's my. There
you go. There's a guilty pleasure.
And a lot of McDonald's won't serve breakfast anymore, but this one does. And I looked at that's my
Wow. Well, thank you again, Lance Hillsinger, and appreciate your time and coming on the DADennial podcast. And please go to his website. You have a website?
Yes, lancehillsinger.net.
And we'll also have the 4 books on there as well that you can check out. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to thank Lance Hillsinger again for coming on. Hopefully you can go get his books on Amazon, Build a Better Bridge in place of the other parent. I appreciate his knowledge and ability to share all that he's learned in his 40 years in social services programs. And also want you to go to DADennial.com, subscribe to the newsletter, leave a comment below on the YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. The more that we get, the better that it goes. And give us some ideas, suggestions of other guests that you'd like to have on. Have a good rest of your day.